Welcome to Greenlight Pod. I'm your host, Chris Long. I am going to hit a few topics today. We're going to talk about um, tackle movement in the NFC East. A couple guys could be on the move. Couple iconic offensive tackles in their respective franchises could be on the move. We've got a O-lineman for O-lineman trade. We have some Eagles movement organizationally and player-wise, possibly in free agency, and we've got broadcasting trades. We've got a whole bunch of stuff, and a reminder on Tom Brady. NFL news is heating up. There's a lot of free agency talk. There's post-combine talk. We've got some player movement trades, a player-for-player trade, and one long-term fixture in the NFC East who's probably on the move. Actually, make that two. They're both tackles. One of them's going to hit free agency, and one has permission to seek a trade. The former being Jason Peters. Jason Peters has been in Philly for 11 years, 11 brilliant years, left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. One of the brightest spots in the franchise over that time. And somebody who I think should probably have his number retired. I think the Eagles have about 8 players, including guys like Reggie White, Brian Dawkins, Jerome Brown, a number of guys that have their jersey numbers retired. I think number 71 should eventually hang in the rafters. That's how powerful a stint he had in Philly, or he has had in Philly, because Philly hasn't closed the door yet. Just being there 2 years, I could really see the level of respect he had. And I could see, obviously, the product on the field, which even, in the back half of his 30s is still very good. So the Eagles are leaving the door open for a return. I don't think it's likely. They're kind of forced to burn the ships and commit to last year's 22nd overall pick in Andre Dillard, who struggled mightily at right tackle, but looked a little bit better at left tackle last season. His anchor was suspect, but the greatest concern was probably internally talks about his mental toughness. He struggled with the Philly media, which is not going anywhere if you haven't noticed. And also, from my understanding, the media wasn't that tough on him. He's probably going to be under even more pressure if he does replace a giant in Jason Peters, both figuratively and literally, if JP is indeed going to depart in free agency, which is what it looks like. And then you've got the situation with Big V, who's been there about 4 or 5 years, maybe 3 or 4 years. And he looks to command about $8-10 million in the market. Now, I think his number more realistically should be about half that a year. But because of the way the market is and because of the way Big V is going to get paid, they probably can't keep him, which is going to affect the depth. So I don't know what they do if they bring in sort of a veteran, backup, third tackle type guy. I would hate to see it disrupted where you got to move Lane over to left tackle. I know Lane can play left, but Lane is a terrific right tackle. So what you do at left tackle is going to be paramount here. You're kind of taking a step out into the unknown here, letting your security blanket for the last 11 years go. And the pressure on a guy like Andre Dillard is only going to accelerate as he's presumably replacing this giant JP. And as I've said, JP was dominant in Philly. I mean, five Pro Bowls, or 7 Pro Bowls actually in Philly, to add to his 2 Pro Bowls in 5 years in Buffalo, as well as 2 All-Pro selections in Philly. Athleticism, power. It's just something we just marveled at every day in practice. I mean, standing around one-on-ones, there'd be something he did every week in practice that everybody would just kind of look around like, holy shit. factoring in his age or not factoring in his age, he's one of the biggest freaks of nature I've ever seen. To have that anchor and those feet, like he could beat you to a spot. And usually, if a guy beats you to a spot that quickly, he's going to be light in the ass. He's going to be off balance, and he'd be perfectly under control. And it's like moving a brick wall. It's not happening. So yeah, his play has slipped a little bit lately. He struggled with penalties a bit lately. And I know this is kind of a long-term thing. Well, we took Andre Dillard at 22. We think highly of him. We have to commit to him. And even if if JP's the better option right now, we have to commit to the young tackle. And I understand that thinking to a degree, but these are important. This is an important year for Carson Wentz coming up. It's an important year for the organization. And if you believe that you can develop Andre Dillard under the tutelage of Jeff Stoutland and Doug Peterson, and with the help of veterans like Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson, into a solid, dependable guy who can protect Carson's blind side, a guy who, by the way, has all these injury concerns swirling around him, or let the media tell it. He's just been like the walking wounded, although he played 16 games last year and exited with a concussion that had nothing to do with really his durability. You need a left tackle that's gonna make you feel protected, and I don't think that next year Andre Dillard is a better option than Jason Peters. I could be wrong. It doesn't look like it at this point. So, who is Jason Peters' next team? Because even on the back end of his 30s, he can still play. He's got one, maybe two more good years in him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he kept playing longer than that. This guy's just a football fanatic. He can't get enough of the game. He's the closest thing to a coach on the field that I've ever seen. And I play with a lot of Hall of Famers, and I've been lucky enough to play with a few Hall of Famers. Okay, so like Aaron Donald is going to be a Hall of Famer in my opinion. Rob Gronkowski, Tom Brady, Steven Jackson, Leroy Glover, guys that I think deserve a look for sure. I've never played with a guy that did more to transfer that knowledge that he had accrued over the course of a spectacular career than Jason Peters. I mean, this guy was like literally a coach on the field, and I'll get to that in a minute. But looking at his possible destinations, his landing spots, I would see the Jets as one. He said he'd be willing to play right tackle. He said he'd be willing to bounce around, so keep that in mind as you discuss this. But the Jets and Joe Douglas. Joe Douglas knows Jason Peters well. Really admires him, I'm sure, and knows that he needs to keep Darnold upright. The three teams, though, that I think are going to be at the core of this thing will be Cleveland, the Chargers, and the Patriots. Cleveland would obviously covet his leadership. He could be a big force in that locker room, as well as on the field. Obviously, they need to keep Baker upright. The Chargers, and by the way, Barry's in Cleveland now and has history in Philly. So as a GM looking to bring in a guy like Jason Peters, that would be a win right off the bat. Although the Trent Williams news that dropped today that he has permission to seek a trade could affect that somehow and affect JP's market slightly. The Chargers, though, just traded away Russell Okung. They're in need of a tackle. And lastly, the Patriots. I know Eagles fans don't want to hear this, but JP would be the perfect Patriot. He would be Bill Belichick's type guy. If there's one thing that I know about Bill Belichick is he respects great football players and guys that have had long, successful careers. I think that although a trip to Foxborough may not guarantee a chance to win a Super Bowl on the field the way it once did, it's still there. And, there's a lot of questions as far as Tom Brady's future, what happens at the quarterback position, what's the direction of that team. But let's say they are retooling and making another run at it. JP would be a nice piece for them to pick up, not only in the locker room, but on the field. And I'd be willing to bet that Bill would love to have JP in the locker room. And that's a place that, you have to love football to be up there. I've said it before. There's no windows in the facility. It's all football. You're checked in. You're checked all the way in for the day. JP, and I'll talk about this in a minute, would never leave the facility. When I say who's addicted to the facility, to football, he was on the highest level. So, again, Cleveland, the Chargers, possibly the Jets as a wild card here, and the Patriots as well. And, just as we talked about Andre Dillard, a lot of the concerns I have about him succeeding, Jason Peters involved, stuff that didn't even involve his ability on the field. Jason Peters will leave a void off the field as well. I mean, it's not all about his really solid play at left tackle. And he played in 13 games last year, gave up, I think, 16 pressures. Still a solid starting left tackle in the league at his age. But the thing I'll remember about Jason Peters in Philly was his larger-than-life persona. He was literally like the mafia, but he wasn't like going to walk in the room and kill anybody or whack anybody. But when he walked in the room, you knew it. I mean, it was an undeniable presence. He was larger than life, his strong voice, and physically imposing. I mean, the guy's like a bear. But he had the rarest skill of them all, and that was the skill of a teacher, a mentor. And I think when you talk to his teammates, that's the one thing that stands out. I've talked to numerous teammates about, the effect that JP had on their careers casually in my 2 years in Philly. And to a man, everybody would have a story. I mean, I can remember Brandon Brooks talking about when his anxiety episodes kind of emerged in 2016. Here's this grizzled vet who's old NFL, and somebody talking about their anxiety or mental health in the, a decade ago in the NFL would be kind of unheard of. And JP's the one to pull Brooks aside and say, "I got your back. The whole way through. You're going to be all right." Those type of stories, and there's plenty of them. Guys have issues in NFL locker rooms that they have to overcome. They have personal issues. They have football issues. And I always saw JP standing up for his teammates, coaching younger guys. I would bet, and I wasn't in the locker room last year, that he worked really hard, tirelessly, to help accelerate Andre Dillard's progression, even if it meant that eventually he would replace him, because that's the type of guy he is. And, he would be the last guy to leave the facility a lot of times. And I was kind of a guy who would hang around the facility a lot. I didn't get a lot of my work done before work. I used to stay late because I like to sleep. JP would be there. I know that when you're an old guy, sometimes, and you're joining a new team, it's sold and it's pitched as you're this locker room presence or, great leadership. And I always felt kind of insulted at times late in my career when I heard those buzzwords about me all the time. Even though people are trying to compliment you, it feels like they're glossing over your on the field stuff. And they definitely can't gloss over Jason's on the field stuff. He can truly still do both. He has gas left in the tank. Again, when I would be there late, he'd always be wandering the locker room. He'd always be hanging out, whether he'd be shooting baskets on a little pop-a shot in the corner of the locker room with a teammate, or playing pool. We used to play pool, me and JP. And JP was probably the best pool player in the whole locker room. So I would play him 10 times, might beat him once, and it was like a big deal to me. And he was just competitive. Like it was a lot of gamesmanship with him. We'd play a game and he'd let me get up and get ahead of him, and then he'd just run the table. He used to say, "Oh, you got me long." Like I'd be up like 3-4 balls, and then he would just run the fucking table. And it was just these mind games. I would be there with the 8 ball, ready to hit it in and be done with it and get a big win against JP. And just the pressure of having JP standing there in my periphery, just this massive dude who I knew was going to just beat me if I missed this shot every time I'd miss the shot. He just had that aura about him. And, whether it was that, whether it was, pulling up to the facility, seeing JP's big conversion van that he would roll in. He had his buddy that would drive him around. You knew he was at the facility. You just knew he had that presence, and it was all that stuff matters. He was a really great teammate, and he had this corner locker. Back in the right hand corner of the locker room where the O linemen were, but he was like the OG. That's why I call him OG on my phone. He's OG Peters. Like I said, he was like this mafia dude, this benevolent mafia dude that would take care of the younger players and would kind of ran the building. So it's going to be weird to imagine a locker room, that corner locker, not occupied with anybody in it. I do think that they should leave that locker unoccupied in the corner of that Eagles locker room in South Philly. And I think they should retire the jersey number as well. And I really hope he gets a Super Bowl on the field. Wherever he goes, I'll be pulling for that team. I hope he gets the confetti treatment, falling on his pads, not his hoodie, because, in 17, I watched, and when he went down against Washington at home that night, and everybody knew it was a serious injury and he got carted off, it took the air out of our team. Not just because we knew it would hurt our team, and it did. Now guys like Big V stepped up, but it hurt because you knew he'd been waiting his whole career to play in a Super Bowl, and we knew we had a shot. And even when we won, it was bittersweet to me because although he 100% deserved that ring, just like Darren Sproles did, and the two guys I put in the same category as teammates and men, and guys that had to watch the Super Bowl from the sideline, I want to see JP win one on the field. It doesn't take anything away from his ring. He deserves it. He deserves, I've got 2 rings. I almost feel unworthy of having 2 rings and having to play in 2 Super Bowls when you got a guy like JP or Sproles who never got a shot to jog out on that field or feel that confetti, and be in the action that day. I want JP to get that ring. So I wish JP the best. I'm really excited for his new opportunity whenever it is. That locker room that he's going to enter is going to be very lucky. You're going to have a guy that can help you on the field, but also a guy that can bring the younger players along and just has a larger-than-life presence. Go ask any Eagle what they thought of playing with Jason Peters. They'll tell you it was unforgettable. Again, wherever he ends up, pulling for him. So in other Eagles news, and by the way, when I look at retired jerseys, retired numbers in Philly, Steve Van Buren, Chuck Bednarik, Al Wistert, Tom Brookshire, Pete, they got a lot of fucking difficult names to Pete Retzlaff. Some of you historians are going to be laughing at me, but okay, I was born in 1985. Chuck Bednarik, I know that one. There's a Bednarik Award. Jerome Brown, Reggie White, Brian Dawkins. That's 8. Number 5, Donovan McNabb as well. So yeah, that's 9, I believe. JP should be number 10. Number 71 should be gone for good. Other Eagles news here. Well, indirectly, Robby Anderson is likely staying with the Jets, is what I'm hearing. And that's a guy who can stretch the field. And that's something that when you looked at Carson and the Eagles last year, they were missing a lot of things offensively. They were sorely missing a guy who could stretch the field. And for a few years, that was Torrey Smith, the Super Bowl year. And then it was supposed to be Mike Wallace. He got injured. Then you bring in Deshaun Jackson. He gets injured. He's out pretty much the whole year. And that kind of left the Eagles with their pants down there. So Robby Anderson is a name that's been swirling around. Obviously, a free agent up in New York with the Jets. I think he's realizing that his market's not as good as he thought, which is an interesting trend here for this. It's an unfortunate trend for these guys who are free as wide receivers this year, and that the draft is so deep. Why pay for a free agent top dollar when you can draft a young player on a rookie deal? And Robby Anderson seems to be the casualty when it comes to that, but so too could be the Philadelphia Eagles because his name had been swirling around as a free agent target. The trickle down effect here, in that he's probably staying with the Jets, is that you've got to draft somebody for sure now in the first round. You have to get somebody who can stretch the field. That guy's probably going to be Ruggs, who ran, I believe it was what did he run, a 4.28? Yeah, that guy can stretch the field. Also, pretty damn good at pickup basketball. I saw that highlight tape. I mean, there's a sport. I mean, that's not even what he does for a living, and he's better at basketball than I was at football. It's just humbling. Draft that guy. I think the Eagles are like, 21? They're going to have a shot there. I think they're going to probably have to take 2 relatively early. And evidently they're out on Cooper as well. So keeping an eye on that situation. Also, you've got the Byron Jones speculation. Interesting stat here when it comes to Byron Jones. Do you realize that he doesn't have a pick since Week 8, 2017 versus Washington, Kirk Cousins? I don't even know if Washington Kirk Cousins counts as throwing a pick or catching a pick. So they're going to have to give him big money. And the one thing to keep in mind is they also have to deal with Malcolm Jenkins' contract situation. How do you prioritize this money? Also, the Eagles lost. It's a big loss here, actually. Zach Groen, who is going to become the Big Ten communications director. He was formerly Eagles media relations, so I would have to deal with Zach at all times. Public relations manager is the exact title. I just knew Zach as a guy who always had my back in the locker room and helped me navigate the Philadelphia media minefield landscape. So congrats to Zach. Actually just talked to him on the phone. Really excited for him. He didn't call to ask me to shout him out on the podcast. I said, dude, I'm really about to shout you out on the podcast. So congratulations to Zach. A lot of players probably are bummed he's leaving, but Big Ten communications director, good deal. Good guy. I also talked about another NFC East tackle at the beginning of the show. And if you have been reading, Trent Williams has been given permission to seek a trade. He's probably going to want to, he definitely wants a new deal. He's probably going to want upwards of $20 million a year. He's an older player, but he also just took a year off. So I don't think you can discount the fact that that's going to help a guy's body a lot. I think that an athlete like Trent is going to be just fine. He could take a year off football, probably not even stretch, run back on the field and be great. And that kind of coincides with the same conversation about, Jason Peters, 2 very good tackles. I think at this point, at this age, you'd obviously rather have Trent, and Trent's going to command more money in the market. Some of these same teams will be looking at him. The interesting thing here is Bruce Allen could have traded him last year. I remember there was a night there where I thought he was going to Cleveland. And they could have got a premier pick for him. They're probably not going to get that now. It's very Washington. And, so we're going to see him possibly in a new uniform next year. I'm excited for Trent Williams. He has been stuck in a hellhole for about a decade now, and I know how that feels. Nothing against, I'm not talking like Washington, the city, but the organization has been tough to play there. We wasted a lot of good football. So we actually had more O-line trades this week as well. Russell Okung, as I mentioned, for Trey Turner, the really decorated guard in Carolina. And Russell Okung, obviously longtime Seattle Seahawk. Formerly now with the Chargers. Now he's with Carolina. So player for player swap, and player for player swaps are pretty rare. They're about 10% of trades are player for player. And to go O-line for O-line, that's pretty interesting. I guess Okung's position coach in L.A. had just been hired in Carolina, in Charlotte. Pat Meyer. Yeah. So, Okung's got one more year under his contract, or one more year under the current contract. I think it's probably a good move for both teams. I can't tell you who's the winner here, but the Chargers obviously need a tackle, and there are at least two new emerging faces in that discussion. Yeah, Browns, as Matt Miller points out, have the number 41 overall pick, and the Redskins don't have a second rounder. So could be something brewing maybe with Cleveland making another run at it. We'll see. Lot of player movement this week already. So as I mentioned, I mean, players are on the move via trades. There's speculation about landing spots as free agency approaches. Al Michaels could be on the move. He will join Frank Gore and Tom Brady as part of a group of senior citizens with a lot left in the tank that could be changing teams. Al obviously plays for the NBC Peacocks right now. It took me like NBC's logo, it took me like 3 decades to realize it was a peacock. Anybody else? No? I'm like that with logos sometimes. It's like I don't even see it. But Al's movement by way of a trade would possibly send him hypothetically from NBC and Comcast back over to ESPN Disney. Obviously, he was with ABC before, and ESPN wants to make a run at the 75-year-old NBC analyst, and I have no idea what it'll take because this isn't something that you see every day. In fact, if this deal hypothetically went through, Al Michaels would be the first broadcaster to be traded twice. I think in the mid-'90s, he was traded for a cartoon character. This is no bullshit. I don't know how that works. Oswald the Mouse. What? Anyways, fast forward to 2020. They want him back, and the chatter surrounding the possible move involves Al and Peyton Manning, of course, teaming up in the booth. And I'm feeling like Tony Romo's $18 million a year is going to make things really interesting now. You talk about Phillip Rivers, also ESPN. That name was swirling around as a possible booth mate with an Al Michaels, who says he wants to keep playing, but when he sees those Tony Romo numbers, you wonder if more players are like, we saw the Michael Thomas complaints about Tony's new salary. Are some players going to look at this opportunistically? They're like, if I'm going to make $7, $8, $10 million on the field, not that Phil's going to be asking for that much, for that little money. I think realistically, Phillip's going to be competitive with Tony's in booth numbers, but you might wonder if some of these players are looking at these booth guys like, yeah, maybe I could make this money and not get hit. Like realistically, I could walk away from football and start a media career and talk about it. But either name here would be very interesting, and it makes this Tony Romo development. It makes him kind of like this Sean McVay. Like he's this trend-setting guy that's busting in the market, this younger, fresh face, guru type presence that, he's diagnosing the plays, flexing the intellectual muscles, and you still got your Troy Aikmans of the world, you still got your Dan Fouts of the world, and it's always been the color commentary on the biggest stage. It feels like it's a quarterback thing, but these younger, fresher faces, this new wave coming out of the game now, it's going to be interesting to see where they land in the media because presumably a lot of them are going to join the media. But anyways, whether it's Phillip Rivers or more likely Peyton Manning, and none of this necessarily is likely because NBC could just veto this thing immediately, but you need Al would probably need his contract restructured. You need the trade to go through. And I don't think either of these guys, whether it's Peyton Manning or Phillip Rivers, would prefer working with Tess, over Al Michaels. Al Michaels is elite, dog. And Tess, who's been great in boxing, got kind of mixed reviews when it came to Monday Night Football. So a lot of moving parts here, but essentially what's happening is ESPN will be angling to kind of show their commitment to football in the wake of some years where the perception was that they weren't as interested. And on the heels of this, not on the heels, in lieu of this upcoming TV contract negotiation deal with the NFL, Jimmy Pitaro of ESPN is kind of on this apology tour where he wants people to know that we're serious about football. And one way to do that would be to commit big money to somebody like Al Michaels. And doing that, you really want two things. That's what Disney wants. You want ABC, you'd want eventually to land a Super Bowl. And two, B, you'd want Monday Night Football to return to ABC. You know, initially Monday Night Football was taken off of ABC's books and shifted over to ESPN because, as I understand it, you felt like it was better to burden ESPN with the costs at the time. Now, in the era of cord cutting and like some subscription canceling and cable being where it is, ESPN having Monday Night Football has become a little bit more burdensome, a little bit more cumbersome. You want that to go back over to ABC. And by the way, I just love the look of ABC Monday Night Football. I miss that. I think Al Michaels would be spectacular with Peyton Manning. I don't even know how Peyton Manning would be, and I know there's kind of like, you kind of look at this thing and it's like the coaching thing. You know, a lot of coaches that have been at it for a long time, they're not getting paid a lot of coaches that have been at it a long time are just like a lot of these broadcasters have been at it a long time, not getting paid $18 million. You're looking at Tony Romo like, what the fuck? I've been at this for 30 years. But I do think he's changing the landscape. I don't think it's necessarily a thing where Tony's gonna now raise the market favorably to the tune of, you know, this is now the bar, 18 million's the bar for the rest of the color commentators in the business. You also have studio people, you have media members at large. It's not like every media member is looking at Tony Romo's thing excitedly because they're going to make more money. It's not going to work like that. Tony's an outlier. But he could stem some change when it comes to the way you look at the newer hires in that business, and, you know, some younger, fresher faces that came right off the field, and I think Peyton would do pretty well there. But again, some people might find that insulting because Peyton hasn't even been in the booth to pair him with Al Michaels. But that's the way this thing's going. I'd love to see Al Michaels back where he started, to be full circle, and I can absolutely hear him and Peyton in the booth. And the question is, what would it take? 18 to 20 million is evidently what it would take for Peyton. I don't know what it would take to snag Al Michaels, but man, that would be fun. And, you know, you would miss the, what do they call that when Chris Collinsworth slides in? It's just a Collinsworth slide. I don't know if Peyton has the slide that Al's used to, that he's accustomed to, but he's got time to work on it. And I think their chemistry, the Prance, that's what we're calling it. the Collinsworth slide to the Peyton Prance. I don't know. I don't know why. I can hear them in the booth together, and I would be excited about that. I would be excited about Monday Night Football back on ABC at some point. Kind of remind me of my early childhood. Well, what year did they lose it? Anyways, a lot going on in the NFL. Free agency coming up soon. You've got the Tom Brady thing. You know, that it's getting new legs every day. It's a new destination. It's a flavor of the week type thing every week. It's whether it's Tennessee, Vegas. As I mentioned, what I'm hearing in Vegas is that possibly Gruden doesn't want him as bad as the front office wants him. And of course, that's always going to be relatively true when it comes to a coach's interest and the front office's interest in Vegas, because, you know, in Vegas, it's going to be about selling tickets and who better to sell tickets than, 6-time Super Bowl champion, bringing him in right off the bat. That would be killer for the front office. But if Gruden, even with all his job security, is not crazy about Brady, that's not as great a marriage. We obviously had the FaceTime in at Syracuse, as bizarre as that, the FaceTime with Vrabel, as bizarre as that was at Syracuse, which, by the way, you're sitting in the front row. People behind you can see it. So it's not like they got snuck up on there unless Julian Edelman, if you gave him a Madden awareness rating off the field, it's like a 26 because he had to know people behind him would take what they were going to take from that. So you've had Tennessee, you've had the Chargers being talked about, you've had Vegas being talked about. I don't think Indy is a destination that Tom would be particularly interested in because of Peyton. I think that San Francisco. I wrote about San Francisco over the summer. I wrote for Jimmy Traina's. I forget what the Train of Thoughts. That's the column. I wrote about a scenario where possibly Jimmy is pretty good but can't get San Francisco over the hump because they're loaded, but they don't get the desired result because of quarterback play, and possibly Tom plays pretty good, not great, and there's a schism when it comes to him and Brady, and there's a situation where possibly the team swap quarterbacks, not via trade, but effectively they trade quarterbacks. Now, nobody wants that to come true more than me because I wrote the column first, okay? Come on, this is how this works. I'm a rookie at this media thing. If Brady went to the Bay the way that I wrote about it in the summer, I would be overjoyed. I also think that it's not as simple as you might think. You look at it and you say, some people might say, well, Jimmy had a better year than Tom last year. Yes and no. Jimmy had a statistically pretty good year, but he missed some big throws. Tom didn't have a great year, but he also didn't have half the weapons Jimmy had. And, if you're saying, well, Kyle Shanahan has to make that move, I'm just going to tell you, it's more than just who'd be the better quarterback for our team. It's also about your locker room. And I'm sure they would eventually get on board if there was a move for Brady. But you saw Kittle amid, that speculation that Brady was headed to the Bay, posting on Instagram, let's run this back 10. I talked to a 49er who told me, I had actually asked him open-endedly, who's the best teammate? Who are some of the best teammates you've ever had? Unsolicited, he mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo. Other players called this speculation ludicrous. John Lynch, the 25th of February, comes out and says that Jimmy's our guy. Things change, though. And sometimes you have to do the uncomfortable, unpopular thing, and people get over it. But let's not oversimplify it. There's also the whole assumption that, Kyle would even want Tom Brady at this point, or that he would fit in that offense with all the move the pocket stuff, etc. Could they work around him? But that rumor has picked up steam. The key here is that it's the March 18th date. The minute that date hits, Tom's going to cost the Patriots, no matter what, 13.5 in dead money if he rolls. So if Tom wants to stick to New England and stay in Boston, they need to get a deal done before then, because at that point, if they do a deal before then, he's only going to cost 6.5 against the cap. If I read that correctly in the Barnwell article there. So, if the clock strikes midnight and Tom has not reached an agreement with the Patriots at that date, he's probably gone, because he has taken into account, he's aware that he's going to cost the Patriots more if they don't get a deal done by that time period. And if he wants to come back, they're going to need that cash to surround him with weapons. So keep an eye on that date. Be wary of the flavors of the week. unless, of course, it's San Francisco and my column is proved right, and then everybody gets in line to pay me a bunch of money because I'm basically Nostradamus. I'll take 10 mil a year just to write columns, prophetic columns. So yeah, that was as much of the NFL news from the past couple days as I could cram into an impromptu pod. I want to remind you that me and William Hayes did a podcast in the Serengeti late at night in Tanzania about a week or two ago, and we did it. We did it. I got the audio back. We chopped it up. We pushed it out. We packaged it and rolled with it this morning. So check that out if you haven't. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Same thing coming up for Aaron Donald, Fishbowl interview, exclusive sit down. We talked for about an hour. Former teammate of mine, one of the best football players in the league. He's very introverted in general. Like, he's not going to be a big talkative guy, not going to let you in. So I thought we had a really interesting interview, and I learned a lot about him. I sat next to him in the locker room for a couple of years and didn't learn as much as I learned sitting down and talking to him with two microphones. So really cool to have Aaron Donald on the Fishbowl, and that is coming out on audio on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and that's going to be dropping early next week, I believe. So, yeah, that'll be Monday. And again, we're going to have me, Macon Gunner, my co-host, back in the studio doing a Green Light pod. That'll drop Wednesday. So Monday, Aaron Donald. Wednesday, another Green Light pod. Everybody have a great weekend. Y'all take care.